Hi, this time around, I want to talk to you about how to build up your body paragraphs through details and interpretation. So let's take a look at how Megan identifies and interprets details when she's looking at a painting. Let's see if we can use that fancy little pointer device. Woohoo, getting high tech here. So over here, we see in bold specific details from the painting. She's picking out very specific things, their stances, their faces, what they're wearing, their expressions. It's really nice. And then down here, she's saying, and this is what I think this means. So here are the details that I'm interested in. They are specific and multiple. Here is what I think they say about the tension of racial hierarchy and equality. And then I put in orange these last couple lines because I think they're such a beautiful clincher sentence. Really pull the paragraph together nicely. Let's look at another example of Megan's use of details and interpretation of those details. In this one, we're talking about her discussion of a cotton plantation on Mississippi. And again, lots of specific details. Talks about what's in the foreground, describes their clothing, describes the people around them, their dress, and the general sort of emotional, psychological quality of the scene. Behind it, some specific material details of the culture at the time. It's really nice, highlighting some cool, important visuals that she can then elaborate on and explain what they mean, discussing why she thinks these details say this about racial hierarchy and racial equality in this painting. So this is another example of a paragraph that's structured details, then interpretation. And that's a fine way to do it. But actually, an even more sophisticated way to work on details and interpretation is easier to see when we talk about a written text. So here we're looking at Megan's discussion of democracy in America. And in this discussion, Megan has taken a very small quote. I think it amounts to 6 to 8 words. Here it is right here. And worked that into a sentence that interprets the quote. So this is a different model. Instead of the previous paragraphs where we've seen that's a crazy looking D, that looks more like a P. Details first, followed by interpretation. Look at that scribbling. Sorry. What this model is you've got a detail and then right next to it, an interpretation. So we can think of that as sort of DI integrated into one sentence. And this really is the most advanced and most effective model for discussing evidence in writing in general, but in particular, details in the analysis of art and culture. So I wanted to save this one for last because in many ways it's the strongest. You take one specific detail, you present it in a sentence, and in that same sentence you interpret it. And this really is the gold standard of writing details in a humanities paper and relating those details to the interpretations that are the justification for having them here in the first place. Remember, you're simply presenting evidence from the work of art to support an interpretation you're making about the art's meaning. So I hope those 3 examples help you. Let's think about where you need to go from here. As you're looking at an artifact and you're thinking about attention, you're trying to find details. You're trying to find 2, 3, 4 specific details that you can really pull out and identify for the reader, but also describe and, more importantly, interpret and explain. What do these details tell us about the tension between value X and value Y in the pair of ideas that you've chosen to write about, the tension you've chosen to write about? It's always better to over-explain, to explain too much rather than not enough. It's the difference between giving as little information as possible versus as much information as possible. The goal is to explain as fully as possible, not to explain as minimally as possible. We want to really flesh out our thoughts and ideas here. Even the most obvious things, the things that to you shouldn't even need to be said, are worth saying, especially when you're drafting, to really make the connections clear. Later, you can decide if some of your language can be trimmed down or out, but you want to start with really full descriptions, explanations, and interpretations. See you in Blackboard. Don't hesitate to reach out to me if you want to run anything by me.